Okay, I think maybe I can just start before everybody's joining. So hi everyone, hello and welcome to our session today. We have made it to the fourth and final week of our SI Open Accelerator series, as you can see on the screen here. And over the past 3 weeks, we have really enjoyed some really interesting concepts, practical tools, and also quite importantly, the discussions that we have had in the breakout rooms. It's been a fantastic experience for all of us. I'm Asra, I'm your host today, and I'm joined by co-host Joss, who is joining us from London. And I'm joining you all from Bonn in Germany. So take this moment and then maybe write in the chat where you're joining us from. And this will be also a good time to make a few more connections before we leave the series. So today's series, it's going to be a fun one because we are going to focus on how do we set up and run an initiative, whether it's a co-creation or a project or a lab or an ecosystem. We'll explore the formats of organizing these initiatives and delve into some really common challenges that we face while we are running an initiative. So before we move further, I would also like to highlight again that this is a first of its kind series, and we have kept it quite flexible and iterative based on your feedback from all the sessions that we have done together. We hope you really enjoyed it as much as we have enjoyed co-creating with you. So here on the screen, you see two images and also a logo on top of it. If you click on the logo, you will be sent to a web page where you can access
Can you
these.
share the link, Asra?
Yeah, I think maybe Joss can help me with the links in the chat. Okay. Okay, whilst Joss is sharing the links, in today's event, we have two wonderful speakers, Mariana and Liliana, who are joining us to help us understand how we run an initiative and what are the challenges they have faced through their experience. So before I hand over the screen to them, maybe I'll also give a quick introduction about them. So on the screen on the left side, the first picture that you see is of Mariana. She leads systems thinking at OECD and Environment Directorate. She's been supporting climate policy designs for countries, regions, and cities. She brings a wealth of experience in navigating the complex systems that shape our world. And I have actually pulled this off her LinkedIn page. So she says that the root cause of our societal problems is because of the mismatch in our thinking and complex systems that we are dealing with. And she sees it as an immense opportunity for a transformative change. So we're looking forward to what you have to share with us and the participants today, Mariana. And thank you for joining us. And moving on to Diliana, she is an innovation fellow at the Applied Research for Circular Solutions. She's a passionate leader and a curious learner, and she's also she brings a huge expertise in systems change and value-led approaches and cross sector networks. She explores systemic root causes of global challenges and brings people together for creative collaboration. And she's always seen vouching for bringing people together and have these collaborations happen. So she's going to share her experiences in this. And also a fun fact about Diliana is that she's a co-team member of our SI Networks Environment Hub, and she's been helping us with our strategies. So maybe, Joss, if you can move the screen towards the right, I would just like to spotlight these two sections where we have the Q&A boxes. Maybe when the speakers are giving their presentation, you can just grab a sticky and then add your question there, or you could also do that in the chat and I can do that for you on the board. So I hand it over to Diliana for the presentation.
Thank you, Asra. I'm going to attempt to share my screen now, so I hope this works. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. My side of the board is looking a little bit overwhelming, but I'm going to take you through this journey, and I've included some links so you can come back and click on some of these initiative and practical examples that I'm going to mention. So bear with me. I've also taken this approach to kind of take you a little bit on my journey, because when I kind of like heard this prompt of leading systemic initiatives and system change initiatives, so what are the challenges I'm facing? I think the first thing that comes to my mind is around this relationship between inner development and outer development. So oftentimes as change makers or people trying to kind of look at systems and consider interventions, we have this outer focus on what are we going to do in the world. And oftentimes, or most of the time, our kind of inner unlearning and learning journey, our mindset, our role in the systems, what we have experienced as a system is really influential in the kind of change we're able to see in the outer world. So this journey, I can see how much it influences the next steps that I take when I consider where am I in the system, what am I trying to shift, and how are my inner attitudes and my mindsets and how these are shifting is actually then projecting itself into the external world. So I'm going to start at the top here. I've included these lovely visuals that may help you guess where I'm originally from, where I grew up. I'm from post-communist Bulgaria. I grew up there in the 90s. I was born the year that everything shifted there with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And this is actually an image of a monument on top of a mountain that I just came across while I was just hiking and looking at beautiful nature. You kind of see these strange interactions between people and the natural environment in that place. And kind of growing up at that time, I feel like I had these huge questions about the way change happens in big systems in nature and society. There were very few answers. There was a lot of confusion. My parents were in their 20s when this happened, and they had grown up in a completely different system. So that's kind of a big, I guess, kind of milestone in my journey that affects the way I see systems and the way I consider change in the world and my role in it. Kind of moving on, one of the kind of big elements in my journey that happened next was the education that I got. I did my first degree in the US. I got a scholarship, had never been on a plane, never lived in an English-speaking environment before. And I got a degree in ecology. And the kind of first big project that I now think of as a systems change project that I did was actually this initial research that really forced me to think about interactions and interconnections in a lot more holistic ways and kind of develop my relationship with complexity. So this was my student project, looking at a forest. If you zoom out, we have these trails and all of the students, this was our forest on the campus near the university where I lived. But we were looking at the human disease risk of Lyme disease. So that's a disease that is caused by bacteria that lives in ticks. And these ticks usually use deer as their main host. But the introduction of invasive plant species in that forest was affecting the density of deer populations, that was affecting the density of tick population, which was affecting the Lyme disease risk for people who are intersecting in that forest. So these kind of system maps of what are these complex interactions that were happening was this initial training of the muscle to work with complexity, to understand the system of people as one part of this bigger complex world. And this is how I started entering the kind of change-making world, if you like, in the more conventional change-making world in nonprofit organizations. So over the past 10 years, since 2015, I've worked in 3 international NGOs. So these are kind of the next 3 boxes here. And I started working on plastic pollution. And you can see some of the links here of these like tiny organisms eating microplastics, so taking something really, really small in the environment and seeing the big, massive links to bigger societal systems. So some of my ecology background led me to taking samples in oceans really far away from land, seeing plastics in the bottom of the food chain and trying to link that back to where is it coming from, all the way to products, waste management systems, and even the fossil fuel industry, where a lot of our plastic products actually come from. So in the kind of first systems change initiative that I worked when, we formed a coalition of NGOs to look at the root causes of plastic pollution, specifically these tiny pieces of microplastics in the oceans. And some of the kind of big sources we focused on initially were toiletries, personal care products. And this is a picture of me in a pharmacy in the UK in 2015, looking at the ingredients in face washes and toothpaste and connecting that all the way to what we're seeing in the food chain that also affects us. And now there's a lot of scientific literature there on microplastics found in our brains and in our blood system and how that's affecting our health. So the kind of main purpose of that campaign there with NGOs was influencing policy and influencing the decisions of businesses that were producing these products through volunteer commitments, through policy change. And these were the early days of starting to look at the multi-stakeholder initiative, to kind of use one term, or who are the key actors and players in the system affecting the kind of problem that we were considering, and how do we start bringing these players together. And I think that was extremely challenging at the time. In the NGO that I was working for, Flora International, no one had really done that kind of collaboration, and if you like, pre-competitive collaboration within the NGO space. So that was an organization working behind the scenes with a lot of policymakers and businesses, and the coalition involved organizations like Greenpeace that had a lot more an activisty approach. And it kind of really practice meeting each other where we are and seeing the value of us facing the problem together rather than competing for financing and resources, and adopting different approaches in a kind of siloed ways. So there was lots of learnings there. We had one of the kind of big successes of that campaign was getting legislation introduced in the UK on microplastic ingredients. And I really wanted to go deeper into what are the other big kind of leverage points in that system of plastic pollution and the root causes that I had learned at the time, and how do we avoid kind of approaching that problem? Shall we have a ban for every single plastic item that is unnecessary can be replaced? And we've started seeing that there are bans of plastic straws or plastic cutlery and plastic plates. And do you do that country by country? It felt like it was becoming a very reductionist piecemeal approach, even though we had tested some of these kind of bigger collaborations, drawing on different actors in the system. So the next organization that I went to work with is now called Ocean Generation. At the time when I joined, it was called Plastic Oceans UK, and it started its life with producing this kind of groundbreaking documentary that is on Netflix called The Plastic Ocean. And it looked at movement building approaches, especially with youth, with young people, underrepresented young people, and galvanizing that momentum to create additional leverage in that system. These young voices, future generations that are seeing themselves and what is happening to our oceans, envisaging the futures and what change they can drive. So that was a lot of empowerment and enablement of young generations and players in the system that were really underrepresented at the time. And kind of where I want to spend the majority of the time with the more really practical examples is one of the latest roles that I had with the Ella MacArthur Foundation, working on kind of the deep root causes in the global economy, and how the way the economic system is currently set up is actually really influencing what the companies, the businesses, the citizens in that system are able to do with a big global challenge like plastic pollution. You may have seen some of the initial kind of research or publications from the Ella MacArthur Foundation, but in a nutshell, it's starting from the idea that the current economic system is linear and extractive. We take materials from the ground, like oil and gas, we turn them into products that we then use in a very linear way, and often for just a few minutes, like a plastic bottle. We throw them away, and then they end up in landfill and stay in the environment, because there isn't really a way in a finite planet. So how do we transition to a circular economy where materials don't become waste, and we maintain products and materials in their highest value? My first few roles in the foundation were very much around stakeholder engagement. So there's this global plastics pact network with initiatives all around the world. And some of the kind of big learning there was a lot of challenges around coordinating these initiatives, but also I was kind of seeing how top down some of these approaches really were. A lot of
I think, yeah, you're back. You were
Can you still hear me? I'm so sorry. My internet's jumping. I'm hoping that you heard the last part. So lots of challenges and learning around coordinating these initiatives around the world, and some of the top-down approaches that were emerging, but also seeing that we weren't really getting to the point of shifting mindsets. There was still a lot of kind of superficial discussions around recycling, and there wasn't a lot of clarity of how do we really get to keeping materials in the highest use and reuse in that system, not just recycling and waste management. So there was this publication, there's a link to it that you can click on, the Upstream Innovation Guide, and it was kind of using that idea and the metaphor of a river, like can we go further upstream in how we think about the system and the product design and the material selection, so not just collecting and sorting waste, but where is the waste coming from? and thinking about the mindsets in that, of rethinking the entire business model, the packaging, the product, and adopting this innovation, upstream innovation mindset. So the kind of project, or this kind of like big initiative around practicing applying that mindset, was this reuse work that we did last year. So this is a publication called Unlocking a Reuse Revolution, and it looked at a system, creating an entire system that completely re-envisages how we deal with packaging in our cities, in our everyday lives. And some of the key kind of maybe themes there was around making this really, really tangible for people. So we worked with some design agencies, and we kind of created these like fake brands that look like they're real brands, but these are completely made up, to show that if we're able to create kind of standardized packaging that can be used for anything from coffee to rice to our pastas, and it's not in this like flexible plastic packaging, but it's something that can be cleaned and maintained in circulation, that can actually really support a system in a city. And there's an extra animation on the website where we decentralize a lot of where packaging ends up, and a city can fully manage that. And when you go to a local supermarket, you can find all of the products that you need in returnable packaging that then you can either return to the supermarket, you can return it to your bus station, you can return to your library, or it can be picked up from your doorstep. And for that to happen, we obviously need completely another way of collaborating across all of the different players in the system, a fundamentally new approach across the financial sector, the policymakers, businesses, but also crucially citizens and civil society, coming together around this and practicing this in a very much a place-based transformation. I can all say that with all of the conviction, and we can kind of we had these systems change scenarios. We also modeled what would happen if we don't get to this really high level collaboration, if we have fragmented efforts from individual companies, or kind of initial collaborative actions and project level basis, but not getting to systems change. But really the big kind of challenges and the big opportunities for the kind of transformation and practicing this mindset is what happened when we started bringing people together in a room, in a physical space, in person, and really building the trust and that pre-competitive space where people can really meet each other where they are and start removing some of the kind of really rigid structures and hats that people normally wear in these kinds of spaces. So a few of the kind of key things that to me made a really big difference were around inspiring people with stories. So we did a lot of embodiment exercises around getting people to close their eyes and really imagine their local shop 10 years from now, walking into that shop, what everything there looks like, smells like, feels like, seeing the reflection in the window, the new white hairs that they have, like making it so tangible. But then also drawing on some nature metaphors to kind of see like how does infrastructure really work like in nature. So we use the metaphor of a honeycomb and bees. Honeycombs are actually one of the most incredible infrastructures in nature. And if you kind of consider how a bee would approach creating a honeycomb, it would be absolutely wild to consider that a bee can construct anything like this on its own. If one bee just kind of goes to a plant and comes back and carries pollen, by the time you kind of have like one honeycomb structure, you would be completely exhausted. So we kind of worked a lot with this honeycomb, and these are some screenshots of me doing some of the initial videos and engagements. I carried an actual honeycomb with me to keep people on this journey of like shifting the perspectives and asking kind of questions that get you to think in a different way, to see this from a different angle. How would nature approach this? How would we approach this? And some of the workshops that we did, we got people to kind of role model and kind of pick roles inspired by nature. But then probably my favorite workshop exercise that we did when we kind of brought some of these key players in the room was around swapping, like actually swapping roles. Some of the dynamics that you might be familiar with when you bring these people in the room initially, and we haven't taken the time to build trust as human beings that are also want to be good ancestors and good neighbors, not just representing these organizations, is that there's a lot of like caution, potentially pointing of fingers and saying, well, as a retailer, I can't really do much on this system. unless this brand does X, Y, and Z, I need to wait for the policymaker to do X, Y, and Z. There's a little bit of like, I'm waiting on everything else and I can't, like my actions are locked. So to try to unlock this, we did this hat swapping exercise and we tried to make it really kind of physical and tangible on the day. So when people walked into the room, they had these kind of like lanyards or like badges that said, okay, here's my name, but I'm also currently representing a policymaker, my civil society organization. And we got them to take these and actually swap them. So for like a few hours that day, they had to walk around the room carrying someone else's badge, and kind of prompt for them to be asking each other questions with the most open mind, with a curiosity, and really get to the bottom of what would others in the room need from me to be able to take the smallest next possible step towards that system change scenario of the returnable packaging system, which can seem really uncomfortable, but it really gets to practice that muscle, walking into someone else's shoes, seeing someone else's perspective in a deeper way, not just reading about it, but experiencing it in your own body. And then we generate this kind of big wall where everybody went and kind of put like what they had learned from the perspective of all of these other actors in the room. And on the back of that, then kind of working on the final stages of this publication, we had all of these quotes from different players in the system to kind of take the initial proposal that we had put on the table. This was the original proposal of like, we need this fundamentally new approach that is holistic and that gets all of these actors in the system to really work together in ways they had never worked together before, to see how people had started embodying this work. And these are some of the quotes that then came from people who had experienced that in practice. And you can see that in their own words, they're kind of asking for systems that are considered as a whole and requiring the stakeholder collaboration. And I feel like that to me is like, there's still a lot, this was still a publication. There's still a lot of challenges to doing this in practice. But I think the ability to practice building these muscles and not just telling people what to do, but taking them on the journey, creating the conditions where people can develop these muscles and adopt this mindset is probably the biggest thing for me that I've taken away from working on this. And maybe, I'm not sure how I'm doing with time, I will kind of link it to what I'm doing now. So I've kind of wrapped up this project. This was published last year, and I did another role at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation with another team that was more cross-cutting. It was called Design Activation Team. This was still very much with the Plastics Initiative, with the foundation. And I really wanted to also kind of go back to that idea of what we practice internally, both within us as individuals, but within organizations, really does affect what we can do externally with other partners. So one kind of example that I give that we laughed a lot about, but it was quite a painful realization, was that within our teams, within the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, internally in the organization, when I was developing this exercise with my immediate team in the Plastics Initiative, we didn't have a lot of spaces or kind of working groups or interactions with our internal team. So within the foundation, we would have a finance initiative and a policy initiative. And all of these teams didn't really practice this internally very well. We didn't actually understand each other's teams that well. So when we came together in that workshop, it was quite clear that we were taking people on the journey externally with something that internally was still quite difficult. Like it didn't feel that we were able to really role model that from what we were doing internally. So the kind of latest work that I'm doing now here with the Applied Research for Circular Solutions, which is a program with Swansea University in Wales, is working with small social enterprises, community interest companies, small businesses that were really underrepresented in my previous work in the foundation, where we work with some of the biggest brands and retailers globally in the plastic space, but also looking at the deep design of business. So when we think about the people who come to these workshops and who are the actors, we can think of them as representing organizations, but within every single retailer and brand, there are hierarchies and so many layers of decision-making that oftentimes we don't dig into. If there's one person, for example, coming from a big brand like Unilever, they may work in their sustainability department, but the way decisions would be made in that brand would involve the CFOs and the board of directors and so many other teams. So I really wanted to look at, okay, what are the conditions within each of these organizations that enable transformative ideas or really block them? So that the Donut Economics Action Lab have created a tool for businesses. It's open source, it's on their website. There's a link to that I've included in this box. So you can fully dive into it. But it looks at these kind of 5 layers of deep design of businesses that can either empower and enable that level of collaboration that we're talking about in a kind of systemic, like an ecosystem approach to a big global challenge and the root causes, or can absolutely block them, even if the individuals that come to these workshops have the best intentions, have quite a lot of decision-making power, do all of that practicing, but at the end of the day, can the organization actually adopt that as a whole in the long term? So some of that is what I'm currently practicing with some of the smaller businesses here in Wales, and we just run a workshop on this last week, and it's really fascinating to see what things are emerging when it comes to these latest challenges of whether the thinking is short-term or long-term. Is the culture of courage or of hierarchy? Are we able to suspend practicality long enough to consider some of these biggest ideas that we need for the systemic approaches? So it's attempting to go one layer deeper. It's probably one of the most challenging topics that I've picked on so far on my journey, but I'm wondering whether I stop here. I've said a lot of words and let people to ask questions or let me know if you want to kind of double down or double click on any of the kind of examples that I've shared, and I can explain in more detail.
Yeah, so that was excellent, Diliana. Thanks a lot for that. But yes, time is upon us. So are there any quick questions for Diliana before we move on?
Diliana, I sent you a message with information about my daughter. She's Chief Marketing Officer for Zevia. They don't sell anything in plastic bottles. How do I connect her with you? I put my email. I'll put my email address in the chat.
Thank you. There's also a link to my LinkedIn, I think somewhere on the board, or yeah, I think LinkedIn is probably the fastest way to reach me, and I can share the link.
My experience with LinkedIn is that I can follow people often, but they don't even allow direct messages.
She probably does. If you follow, then they can message you. But yeah, any other questions before we move on to Mariana?
I had a question to Diliana. So I really liked your approach of asking stakeholders to wear different hats and understand really what the others are doing. So when you were trying to make this transformation or the behavior shift happen, did you face any challenges with the attitudes that were really hard to break out of for the stakeholders, and how did you deal with them?
Yeah, there's so many challenges, so many challenges on that. I think there were a lot of people, even when we did some of the embodiment exercises, there's discomfort of even the exercise of close your eyes and imagine this. So it was a lot of adapting the approaches to lower your gaze, or I did this actually in the Systems Innovation Conference in London. There are things like try to cross your hands just the way you would normally, and then try to do it the other way around. And this is getting people who are like not used to embodying, like what does it take to observe something from a different perspective. It can feel really different in your body and it can be uncomfortable, but we can get curious. There's no risk in kind of shifting how you're holding your hands, but it does feel uncomfortable if you put like the other thumb on top. So kind of getting us to get a little bit more comfortable with some of the discomfort of working very differently and in a very open way with people who might be considered your competitors. But I also find some of the kind of trust building approaches. There's a really good resource called The Braving Inventory of Trust from Brené Brown that kind of breaks trust into 7 elements. Like, what are the key elements that we need to create a trusting environment? That the reminder of having people in the room is we often have a lot of assumptions of what that entails. And there's a quote in there that says, like, we tend to think that people are rational beings that make very rational decisions and think. But actually, people are very emotional beings who occasionally have a rational thought and then carry on being emotional. And all of these reminders of how we work, how we make decisions, how we connect as human beings, what is a relational approach, keep grounding me what is needed to meet people where they are on the journey. So it doesn't mean that we need to kind of force people to engage in a breath work or an envisioning exercise. We can do it in any way that works for them. It could be that they lower their gaze. It could be by using their hand. It could be by having this visual representation from design agency that became a video But any of these things are getting people to see something in a different perspective, and they wouldn't be like one size that fits all of them. So we kind of, for some of these exercises, we had like 3 or 4 alternatives, depending on how people are engaging and where the discomfort is. And I would switch from the instructions from one to the other to see how it lands in the room, and then I would just adapt it.
Thank you, Diliana. That was interesting. So now we move on to our next speaker, Mariana. Would you like to share your screen? And in the meanwhile, maybe you could answer Alba's question here on the chat.
Shall I go ahead, or would you like?
Yeah, go ahead.
I go ahead? Okay, thanks. So hi everyone. You do see my presentation in full screen, right? Yeah, super. So many thanks, Asra and just for the invitation. My name is Mariana. I sit at the Environment Directorate of the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I'm with the Climate Change Mitigation Team. And our mission is to help countries, regions, and cities develop their net zero strategies. We have developed for the last 3 to 4 years a program using systems tools that we call systems innovation for net zero. And I will introduce today briefly what we do and why, and some of the lessons learned of applying these tools, this way of thinking. So maybe first to mention that the starting point is that the systems that we currently have will unlikely take us to net zero on time. The International Panel for Climate Change is very clear on the need for transformation. And for transforming systems, we need to be able to understand policies have had a key role in designing the current systems we have. We can think about socioeconomic systems, mobility, food systems, etc. And they also have the potential to transform them to something that is more aligned to the type of results we want to get for the net zero transition, and also for well-being, for a better well-being performance, right? And that's the questions we are trying to shed some light on is, what are the policies with the potential to trigger transformative change and get us to sustainable results? Diliana was talking about leverage points. In a sense, the idea is to identify indeed what are high leverage points in specific systems. We have so far mainly focused on the passenger mobility system, so transport of people, and we have tried to identify where policies could intervene to really trigger model shift towards sustainable modes. And we also look at what are the conditions that allow the effective implementation of such policies. We know that transformative policies are a little bit more difficult to implement than more technical policies, because they need the collaboration and a way of working for which governments are not necessarily structured for. I would say the private sector is not either. And that's the idea, is to say, okay, what are the type of policies that have the potential to hit on those high leverage points to transform the system, and how can we get to their implementations? Because the most transformative policies, in theory, do not have a lot of impact, right? They need to be implemented. For looking into that, we need to go. Diliana was also talking about the importance of mindset shifts, right? And we need to go through, in our view, a number of mindset shifts on how we think about policies. Let me give maybe a concrete example with transport. So basically, imagine that what we want to change is transport choices in a city. Let's take that as an example. And what we see is that transport choices today are unsustainable, and we would like more people to walk, cycle, or use public transport. And what we see is that most people use private vehicles for the bulk of their trips. The first mindset shift in this case could be to see these transport choices not as individual preferences to which policies need to adapt to, but really as the tip of an iceberg. The tip of an iceberg which is sustained by a system structured in a certain way. So already linking the results to a system that is underlying is a connection that is not always there. and also linking the system to certain ideas. The same ideas will unlikely take us to a very different systems, and thus challenging some of the ideas that got us into designing cities the way we have is necessary if we want to get to a very different direction. The second, so we argue that taking a systems approach and really linking results to systems can expand the scope of public policy, because it can shift our attention from a policy where we reduce the harm of choices that are seen as inevitable to policies that see their role in redesigning systems so that better results emerge by design. And as I was mentioning before, it also helps the tools you will for sure have seen in the previous week help us identify where to intervene to, in this case, in the case of this example, to trigger behavioral change on transport choices at scale. And here comes a second mindset shift that we think is important to bring, which is this idea of looking more at how the system is organized as a whole rather than focusing on specific parts. As you know, our traditional way of thinking, and I'm sure you have discussed this in this series, is that we try to improve parts. So we will, for example, support the purchase of better vehicles, or we will improve bus services. A systems approach, we argue, can help focus the attention more on the way the city is structured. And for example, for transport, how public space is distributed across modes is very important. And thus the systems tools can help us really support these mindset shifts, and of course, where the attention focuses, then efforts focus. And that's it. It's an important shift. We go through a process that has 3 steps. We first talk about ideas, because same ideas, same system. So we first question what are some of the ideas that took us to the current system that we need to question to get to a very different one. We also invite policymakers to imagine what could be. We tend to do that with envisioning exercises that take a little bit of a radical vision, something that is seen as almost ridiculous today, so that they can really think of a system that is very different to what we have today. And here we also help ask them to think about what are the results we want to get, what are the patterns of behaviors we want to get from the system. Next, we move into understanding what is the system structure, so seeing the system that is underlying those results we want to change, and what are the leverage points where policies could have the highest impact. And here we look at, okay, which policies can help us push on those leverage points, and which ones leave the system intact, and which ones actually reinforce the system we would like to transform. And the third step is about actually getting into action and seeing what are the steps for implementing those transformative policies. I'm going a little bit fast here because I know that time is limited, but I'm happy to respond to any questions. Let me maybe show you a few outputs of how we use the tools you may have seen in the previous sessions, and then I'll go into the lessons learned. So in these last 4 years, we have applied these tools and this methodology in Ireland. We also did at the regional level in Catalonia, and we're currently working with Dublin in implementation of one of the transformative policies identified. The objective here was to identify, okay, where to prioritize policy efforts to decarbonize passenger transport while improving well-being. And the redistribution of public space, as I mentioned before, was a key policy. The connection between modes was another key policy. And of course, then the improvement of public transport, electrification are also important policies. The type of outputs we get to is that we categorize policies by their transformative potential. Here, let me get a little bit on the tool. So we use causal loop diagrams, we use stock and flow analysis, we go through mental model analysis, and we tend to use the iceberg model to visually illustrate the policies with the higher potential and are those below water. We do a lot of participatory workshops. The mindset shift rarely happens by reading a report. Already people rarely read a report, and if they do, it's unlikely that they get a mindset shift. So we do participatory workshops where we invite actors to use the tools themselves to discuss around a framing that puts the system functioning at the center of the stage and how policies can intervene there. We also have, for implementation of this type of policies, we have worked with Dublin on setting specific teams, multidisciplinary teams, and creating spaces for these people that work maybe in different departments, but that can gather and get together and develop a shared vision of what they would like to get as a result, a shared understanding of where the best place is to intervene, and eventually create a shared roadmap of what can each of them contribute, what is the agency of each of them for getting towards that shared vision. In terms of some of the lessons learned, and I will share in the chat later on a few videos that go a little bit more in depth on the tools we use. You will also see some videos where we interview people and we ask what are the key takeaways from these type of workshops that maybe useful. A few lessons learned: do not look for a logic, for an order in the items, because I will just share a few that came to mind. The first lesson learned to me is that people enjoy taking an innovative approach. Often after these workshops, and I'm not sure, I would be happy to hear, Lilian, if this is your experience as well. People are happy with thinking differently, with using tools that are not what they use on their daily basis. They are happy as well to think about questions that are not necessarily what is urgent to solve, but actually more long-term. Often what we get as a response in these workshops is that people are fairly energetic, and that they like as well the kind of exercises and breakout groups that are visual, playing a little bit with colleagues, kind of acting a little bit differently than in their daily lives. What we find as well is that for some people, mindset shift can take place quicker than expected. We see, and this is of course more the case when people are already frustrated. What we see, for example, in governments is that there are a lot of people that, differently to the idea that we have from government officials, actually, at least my personal experience is that people want to do a lot. They are very energetic, they want to do a lot, and they often are frustrated by not being able to do more, or by not seeing the results, right? Often I get this sensation of there have never been as many efforts as today, and still we're not seeing the change, right? And in this case, mindset shifts can happen. For example, in the work we did in Ireland, that the categorization of policies led to a revision of their climate action plan, where the targets changed completely. We went from targets focused mainly on vehicle electrification to targets where they are aiming to reduce private vehicle use, kind of as absolute kilometers, and that's a fairly important mindset shift. Just to give an example. In terms of tools, the iceberg model and the causal loop diagrams can really help people see the system, and they have been very useful for us. Mainly the causal loop diagrams, they have been very useful as a storytelling tool. You will see in the videos I will share, we animate them, so they are very easy to follow, and they have been really useful for the system to become less abstract. We use the iceberg model a lot to introduce this idea between results and system structure, and also to categorize policies. We are combining a systems approach where we identify where the high leverage point and which policies can hit there, and we're taking what we call a challenge-led approach to get to these spaces where people can work differently than within their kind of silos in the administration, and the combination of both has proven to be very interesting. One thing that we find as well is that in initiatives where we try to transform systems, it is important not to assume that people see their role in the system transformation, really key to explicit discuss roles and agency, and people in particular in governments tend to have more agency than what they see they may have in the systems transformation, and thus expliciting it and having a discussion on it has been very useful in our experience. And maybe the last point is the importance of shedding light on how the efforts related to a project on systems with a systems innovation lens can solve the problems stakeholders already have. What we have found so far, and this is probably related to how projects get funded, how monitoring and evaluation works, we often tend to track direct impact and effect, which systems innovation project has less or are less obvious. It has been difficult in our experience to fund systems innovation projects, and in particular to fund the coordination roles that are needed for the implementation of these policies, the connectors role. And due to these funding limitations, linking the project as much as possible to what people is already doing is fundamental, because these projects often, at least in our experience, tend to come on top of everything else, and that everything else tends to be a very full plate for government officials. So the framing and starting by asking people what are their problems, what are they are concerned with, and linking the framing of the systems innovation project to those problems has proven as well to be important. I'll stop there.
Great. I'm not sure if there are any questions there, but I definitely had one. You talked at the beginning of that cycle about reframing, and you said you're looking for radical new ideas. Do you really get those? Do you really find people come up with something very different, or does it tend to kind of converge back to business as usual, their idea of what the future might look like? Yeah.
Is that one for me?
That's for you.
Yeah. Maybe I can give you an example. The type of exercise we have been doing is that we have mainly worked on transport, and what we want to, one of the ideas we wanted to convey is that transport choices can be very different than today if we transform the system. And what we ask them is to think about a systems where, and often the barrier that they see is a little bit of a car-centric culture and how people would not accept radical changes. So we try to help, we ask them to think about a scenario where car-centric culture is no longer there. So now they are having manifestations outside their buildings, people asking them to, so having, in this case, the private ownership of cars is no longer an option. How do they reset the system so that people can still get to their needs and they are better off with that? And they often, the times we have done it, of course, saying this is kind of a radical idea, we really want you to think outside of the box. What we see is that people see that transport choices can be significantly different. Often we get to we ask, one of the questions we ask is, so okay, what is a resulting modal share? And it's very different to what they have. And they do get to fairly different systems than the ones we have. Then maybe transport is an easier system than what could be, for example, a food system, because it's physical, right? So I cannot tell you exactly what it could be for other ones, but for transport, it has worked pretty nicely so far.
Yeah, I guess the challenge is coming out with kind of both viable kind of radical alternatives, isn't it? You can come up with lots of ideas, and you get a computer to generate all sorts of ideas to you, but coming up with ones that are actually reflective of the underlying systems dynamic, I think because that's what has to be there. If you talk about systems innovation, you have a system, and you're going to have a system in the future. So you want to transform it, but it's still going to have those fundamental dynamics of that system there. So how can you come up with something that's actually realistic in that context? I'd say, but maybe I'll hand it over to others. Amel, did you have a question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. This question is for Mariana as well. Just first off, thank you so much for your presentation. I was tried my best to consume all of that within such a short time. Just given your work with on systems innovation, particularly in policy and with policymakers, OECD tends to have that reputation of working within the policy field. I'm wondering how you've been navigating these conversations on systems thinking, systems transformation, just given with government specifically, I'm in the policy government sphere myself, but just given some of the political nuances and the political constraints of policy development. So, for example, yeah, kind of like how are you navigating even, certain limited options, policy options, when they tend to be so politicized. Yeah. I don't know if you've experienced that, or if others' thinking has been constrained by belonging to a specific political party, and that radical kind of idea that Joss and you were talking about earlier, or doesn't tend to be fully kind of materialized.
Great. Mariana?
Shall I respond, or do we want to
Go
take
for it.
another one?
Go
Yeah.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, maybe to say that the people in the government we have most directly work with are people that were already seeing the need of a new approach. So there we didn't necessarily get a kind of a resistance to a way of thinking that is different. But they had basically, for example, in the case of Ireland, they had set a very ambitious climate target. They had a climate action plan with a list of actions and the abatement potential of those actions, and they had a gap. So even if they implemented all of those actions, they could not get to their target. So they had a problem that their traditional way of thinking was not able to solve, and thus they saw the need, or they wanted to test a different way of working. That said, some of the results from this analysis can sometimes be controversial. For example, one of the results of our analysis in transport is that subsidies for electric vehicles, they are very important. They need to be there, but we are suggesting that they need to be redesigned so that they are not used for a like-for-like replacement, but that they electrify what is left after we were able to transform the system and trigger modal shifts. And that type of messaging could imply a reprioritization of efforts, because subsidies for electrification are a key part of climate strategies in the sector. So, but the idea is really of bringing these approaches to really think differently about policies and to trigger those discussions that need to be there in a sense. Yeah.
Maybe I'll just follow up on that a little bit. And also, Mariana, you work at kind of all different levels of government, don't you? And in this case, and I think that matters, right? Which level you're at. National government is a lot more difficult than, working with the mayor of a city or a local municipality, where they have a lot more buy-in from the constituents and so forth, and they're more connected to them and so forth. And you don't have a lot of those national political dynamics. I know you work both nationally and with Dublin, didn't you? Yeah, I know when Climate Kick were working nationally in Ireland around decarbonising the food system there, they got a lot of pushback from the farmers around losing jobs and so forth. So I think it matters a lot what level you work, and of course across what country, right? If you're in the United States or Sweden or wherever it is. Yeah. So Michael, do you want a quick question?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I have also a question for the other speaker. But so for Mariana, I'd like to know, I work in a large bureaucratic organization, and I wonder how much support you receive within yours for these types of approaches, and how are you able to share learnings or inspire other teams, and kind of like a lot of these organizations are built in silos themselves. So is there other ways in which this can happen? This can lead also to a mindset shift within the organization and towards institutional change. And for Diliana, I'd like to know what was the aftermath of your process on circular packaging. So maybe to concretize, what have you learned about what works and what doesn't work, sort of beyond the scope of like a project and having the report and everything? Like how like what's durable or like other networks or weaving has been the result?
Yeah, maybe start with you, Diana, on that question. Yeah.
Happy to start. Yeah, that's the best question. Thank you for that. I feel like that I lost count of how many times I said during the duration and all of these workshops that we're not creating a publication for the sake of a publication to become this like coffee table book covering. And there were a lot of really interesting discussions. I think right after this project, I did a session with the London SI Hub with Joss when this was really, really live, and how many kind of initial seeds they were to start actually doing this in practice with the city. And there were some interested retailers, and there was something missing in the system, but there were a few kind of cities that were very, very close to getting to that. And one of the biggest kind of eye-opening moments for me was when we had the European Investment Bank, and they speak very openly about this. They do multi-million projects all over Europe. So that's the European Commission's lending arm. So they do a lot of climate projects, but also a lot of infrastructure building products. So in Eastern Europe, they had done big infrastructure development for new waste collection and for recycling. And they decided to ring fence funding for reuse specifically because they were getting a lot of interest in recycling, but it was obvious that we needed to kind of elevate and go upstream and look at reuse. So they had ring fenced that funding, and they had more funding than projects. Like people were not coming to them, because to be able to pitch for that project in a city, you do need to have the other players fully aligned. So the retailers, the brands coming into that location. So that was fascinating. The funding actually wasn't the problem. And some of the biggest blockers there really were around the pre-competitive side for the brands to create packaging that looks very similar. And then you get marketing teams are saying, like, can we sell just as much of this product if we're not able to differentiate? You know, for some of the brands, like the Coca-Cola glass bottle is iconic and looks so different from Pepsi. So we kind of, on the back of that, started using a lot of examples that already exist, even if they're in the linear system. So if you look at beer cans, they're all in the exact same, you know, the size is the same, and it's super efficient the way you collect them. And you don't get confused about which brand is which. You still are able to work within the confinements of very standardized packaging. But yeah, that was one of the biggest things for me, is that there was a lot of will, there's a lot of interest. And even the funding, which oftentimes in the cases of these big shifts is a problem, wasn't in that case. It really was finding a way to go fully pre-competitive. We even looked at like legislation and what are the pre-competitive laws in the country. So a lot of these, what I'm doing now on the other side, the deep design of business, is looking at where are we really locked in being able to work with players in this pre-competitive space. And sometimes it is in community ownership, steward ownership, like how are the companies actually owned, and what allows them to make decisions for the long term or not. And oftentimes the way a company is completely set up, the way it's owned, it means it has to optimize for shareholder value and generating revenue very, very quickly in the short term.
That's great. It's a great example of the iceberg, though, isn't it? Because you got to go down the iceberg to unpack like what this business is, how it's seeing the world, and what it's set up to do, don't you? Otherwise, you're going to be
absolutely
up down the event level. Mariana, do you want to pick up that question before we move on?
Sure. Maybe to be short, is there support? There is. Is there enough support? Not in my view.
And the OECD is definitely one of those bureaucratic organizations with lots of challenges, but yeah. Okay,
we had a question in the chat before it gets lost. So Parthasarthi had asked, maybe if you can unmute yourself and ask the question yourself, would be great. I'm not sure who decided it, but I can also read it. It says, can you please explain in an organization as a system for the transformation initiatives or programs, how to sync and synthesize the individual objectives with the organizational objective?
That's a big one, all right. Yeah.
I think either of you can pick it up. And
I didn't get it, so I let Viliana.
Okay.
Really thinking about how do you've got individual initiatives, individuals and teams and so forth in the organization, and how do you sync those up with the overall purpose and mission? I mean, you have that challenge in all organizations, right? I don't know, Didiana, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I can attempt that. As I said, that was one of the biggest challenges when I said that how we convened externally people across all of these stakeholder groups, that we weren't doing it internally. Like when I was convening the finance institutions, the policymakers and the brands and the retailers externally, internally, I wasn't sitting in the room every month, even like every quarter, with the internal teams representing the stakeholders within the foundation. So definitely a big challenge that I don't think it's fully cracked. But what we started doing is doing some really informal working groups. Literally, I would just message the people I'm closest to on a personal level in these teams. And we started bringing as many people as we can. It's not easy because it means that you kind of create these new meeting spaces, there's hierarchies, but yeah, finding the initial allies and starting the conversations, literally starting where you are is probably the first thing to say, and then seeing what kind of roadblocks emerge on the way and how you can go around them. But have one conversation with someone that is outside of your silo and see what happens.
Yeah, I think just bring that into the conversation that you may actually need to change the structure in some way. I mean, that's what's interesting about your project in Dublin, Mariana, isn't it? That they recognize that kind of straight off the bat, that they need to change their organizational structure, and that's a lot of what you're working on. So yes, quite often you can't do things within the existing kind of structures that you have, and you need to kind of explore that. Okay, great.
And maybe if I may just add to that, and this indeed creating these spaces for that, but still keeping those structures, because they can still be very useful for other things, right? For running a city, for the stable things, they are still very useful structures.
Yeah.
Yeah,
well,
especially when,
yeah, go. Sorry.
especially thanks, Josh and others. See, especially when there are a lot of self-preservation and the fear comes in place, whether it is fear of judgment or fear of the loss of opportunities. There are so many dynamics happening, especially when there is a transformation scenarios and initiatives are taken. So I am from an automotive organization, and given the scenarios like you have software driven vehicles, and now earlier it was only mechanical systems driven vehicle. Now we are moving into, we had in the recent past software driven vehicle, and now we are moving into software defined vehicle. God knows what other definitions would come now. But in all these transformations, unlike the software industry where everything is virtually simulated first before the deployment, the automotive industry needs to feel first physical and then goes to virtual. For an example, if you take the typical hardware in loop testing happens in automotive product life cycle, where mechanical comes first, and then the HAL comes next, because software is planned for the controllers when mechanical comes first.
Yeah.
Whereas now in the SDV, software defined vehicle, now software takes the first seat, and then it defines the mechanical and electrical so on, right?
Okay.
So
I think we'll need to move on soon, unfortunately, because we've got one quick question from Daniela also. Quickly, Daniela, do you want to jump in before we?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, so thank you guys so much. It was a great presentation, super informative from both of you. I would like to know if you could share what tool or tools or activities would you recommend? I know I've heard of the iceberg model. I've heard from you, Diliana, about the activity of trading badges and things like that. What other kind of tools or activities maybe that you didn't mention, or maybe that you did, that you just truly advocate for using if you're working with a group of stakeholders that want change but are afraid to implement the things necessary for that change to happen, where you feel like you kind of gotta pull some teeth a little bit to get them open to I guess imagining and going for it?
Okay. Mariana, quickly. I think you can say icebergs, but let's go.
Yeah, no, visioning exercises, and I could say reframing questions, understanding a little bit what are they afraid of, and is that fear in line with what is actually. For example, for transport, what we see is that the perception, what people want, what surveys say people want, is very different to what policymakers think people want. So kind of shedding light on that is also, I think, could also be helpful.
Okay.
I wanted to say a quick vote for visioning. Visioning and combining it with some embodied exercises. If you look at Theory U, some of the kind of breathing embodiment and how people can step into a vision of the future and feel that they're there can be really, really powerful. Maybe the other thing I would say, like some of the trust building and relational building, it could be a lot of unconventional things like, can you take people to karaoke dinners? Like building relationships outside of the traditional circles can make such a big difference for how people then step into an iceberg exercise or a visioning exercise or swapping their hats. A lot of relational trust building things that are considered soft just get so overlooked, but they're amazing.
Yeah, and Mariana, in your presentation, you used quite a bit of causal loop diagrams, don't you, I think it's a tool that has a technical aspect to it that keeps people who are quite technical happy, doesn't it? And gives them kind of a sense of a model and so forth. So that's another important technique here, the mapping. Let's move on. That was really interesting stuff. It's why we went way over time to really hear those key insights from Marianne and Diliana. Thank you both very much for that. Hopefully everyone else got, those insights as much as I did, and they're going to feed into our conversation now. We don't have too much time left, unfortunately, just 20 minutes. But wanted to talk about, some of the things that popped out there, but this different types of ways or formats that we go about doing systems change from the micro to the macro, and everywhere in between. We heard a few things already about labs and co-creations and projects, and maybe a bit about ecosystems. So put this graphic together recently. It's one way of thinking about it. On the micro level, we have these small initiatives like projects and co-creations. We saw some workshops there. And these are obviously temporary, they're time bound, they have specific interventions with specific outcomes. But obviously those need to be put together over time and aggregated into programs, into labs that are trying to achieve certain things. And even those labs and programs need to be put into, broader initiatives, hubs that are platforms supporting broader change within this system. And ultimately this ecosystem concept, which is trying to address, the whole of what we're dealing here, whether it's a whole industry like transport there Mariana was talking about, or it could be an energy sector or whatever it is. And systems innovation, systems change kind of has to happen at all different levels. It's not just the ecosystem level, it's all these different levels in between. So today I just want to share a little bit about some of those formats. We'll start down here on the micro level of co-creations. And these are individual. I just quickly grabbed some of Mariana's there because I thought they were good examples, right? She's been to Catalonia and been to Dublin and has run these workshops, these sessions with the different actors there, and you can see what's happening, bringing people together around a shared kind of purpose or intention, the relevant stakeholders. You're creating some kind of a format there, some kind of a structure for them to work together. And we heard, interestingly, one of the quick insights from Mariana was, make this fun and make this a space that actually takes them outside of their traditional confines and their traditional routine, their traditional ways of thinking. This is very important. Whilst we're still in a normal kind of environment and ways of working with the same people, we stay doing the same things. Only when we kind of create new spaces, new environments, we engage people in new ways of working and structures and different diverse people. For example, at our London conference, we had Hannah doing a 3D mapping with Lego serious play, groups of people working with Lego to represent the system they're a part of in a 3D form with little dinosaurs and little Lego men, which is fun and interactive, and you get to visualize it, and it's tactile, and you get to play with it also. So in all these spaces, labs and so forth, we encourage that because you do need people thinking in new ways and feeling. It should always have an experimental dynamic to it. So co-creations, yes, these are essentially like workshops. You're bringing people together around a challenge. These are some of the aspects you want to think about, the challenge, the process, how you're going to organize this, the content that you need in here, the tools and so forth. What's the outcome you're trying to achieve? Who are the participants you need to bring together? How are you going to kind of craft the narrative around this and so forth? We have a guide on the website. You can look into that. Here are some that we have run at SI. Mental health and well-being in a turbulent world. This one here, enabling a circular economy, we ran a couple of years ago online. This one was about how to rethink civil service with systems thinking. That was kind of the outcome, the results from it that we shared back with people, that kind of infographic. So those small initiatives, they're co-creations. They might last 2 hours, they might last a day or even 2 days. Essentially workshops that bring people together to collaborate and work together in new ways. And then over here to labs, which are more substantive things, and they're enduring over a period of time. So that's just this great little guide here. If you want to know more about labs, this is quite recently published, The Future of Labs. Would recommend you take a look at that. Maybe Azra could put a link in the chat there. So this is how they define social innovation labs. It's for holding a space for diverse change makers to sense, make, generate, develop, and test a portfolio of promising solutions to address complex societal challenges in a way that is collaborative, experimental, iterative, and systemic. And they put in minimum core principles to these labs: focus on complex societal challenges, learn from diverse perspectives from across the system, including those with lived experience, explore collaborative ways of working on a shared complex agenda. They're systemic in thinking and action, experimental in developing and testing, iteratively developing and testing possible solutions, ideally in real life, and at a minimum in realistic settings. Aim at exploring root causes of complex challenges. So I have some of those over here, is what they're saying. Like, we want it to be actually as out there in the world as possible. We're trying to get away from where we normally find ourselves in our boxes, right? Often our organizations, we chop problems up and we separate them out and we do our bit at our desk in our organization, and we're trying to get out there together around that challenge in situ, where it is. And you can call those living labs, or whatever you may call them, but labs are essentially platforms for experimentation around societal, complex social or environmental challenges. This is Zaid Hassan, who wrote the book on it. Strategic approach towards addressing complex societal challenges. As a strategy, it's not too hard to grasp. It can be stated simply: bring together a diverse, committed team, take an experimental, prototyping-based approach to addressing systemic challenges at root cause, and keep doing it. I think the keep doing it is an important part of it also. Doesn't happen overnight, and the iterative and experimental part is an important aspect. So I have some examples I collected for you today. This one's in the Netherlands, Marine Terrein. It's an area, it's a living lab in, I think in Amsterdam. Yes, situated in the heart of Amsterdam, functions as a dynamic living lab. So living, when we say living lab, that means they're out there in the world. They're taking a space in the world, and can be like this, a section of a city, and they're running experiments in that place. It might be, for example, testing out new ways of doing lighting within your neighborhood, where they actually go and put new lights in and they see if they work or they don't work. So that's what I mean by a living lab. So this is a unique space, serves as a testing ground for innovative ideas and technologies aimed at enhancing city livability. Much like other cities across the globe, it faces all these challenges, and they're trying to foster creative solutions. The presence of physical hub, knowledge sharing, and collaborative efforts are necessary. So they selected this district where outdoor experimentation is possible. There's a vibrant community consisting of government and these different actors, and this environment facilitates seamless collaboration among entrepreneurs, scientists, so on and so forth. That's a little bit what a lab might look like. Here's another interesting one, Sustainable Food Lab, that's been quite successful, launched in 2004 as a non-for-profit, shift to sustainability from a niche to mainstream in food systems. And we work with our partners to deliver impactful, faster, continuous innovation and sharing our learnings. You can see here some of what they do in terms of their initiatives. There's another one here in the Netherlands about experimenting with bio. So this is microbiology lab. So trying to find new products and solutions for a circular economy. And you can read more about that one there. So there's a little examples I've put here, the guide we have on our website. You'll find the link at the beginning of this board about how we go about thinking about labs and setting them up. We've run some smaller ones at SI, and you can take a look and walk through that. I mean, with all of these, you're essentially, it's the same ingredients. It's these ingredients, really, whether you're doing a co-creation or a lab, or even an ecosystem, they're really the same thing, just at different levels, or a hub. They're really the same thing. You're bringing a diverse group of actors together around a challenge. You've got to create a structure for them to work together around that and co-learning, co-creating over time. And you're essentially facilitating that space. So it takes skills of facilitation, takes many different skills actually, but it's just to step back here and you can see it's kind of a fractal thing, like the micro level of one conference, one convening, or one co-creation is really the same as what you're doing at the macro level, at the larger scales, whether it's labs or hubs or ecosystems. So going quite quickly, apologize about that because a lot of our time is taken up, but let's stay going. We have hubs here. So hubs are essentially, you might say, larger, more substantive creatures than these labs and projects. They're typically lasting a long period of time. Labs are often time-bound, might last, 4 weeks or a year or 3 years. Co-creations are typically very, very short in time. Projects are often time-bound. Hubs may last for a long period of time, and they're more open. They're more platforms for a wide variety of activities for a network of actors to learn, connect, and collaborate around different challenges. So we know about these at SI. We've developed lots of hubs, some of them locations, some thematic. Maybe some of the most famous of these, one of the most famous network of hubs is the impact hubs. You may have heard of them. This is what they look like in terms of their network around the world. Lots of impact hubs, and these are spaces for supporting communities of social innovators and social entrepreneurs, turning ideas into lasting impact. We inspire, connect, and enable impact makers worldwide. Their mission is to build a just and sustainable world with business and profit serve people and planet. And they create these spaces, these impact hubs, as co-working spaces, essentially, locally in these different cities to support the development of that social entrepreneur ecosystem in that community. That's the impact hubs. You'll find a link there. I'm going to stay going so that we might get to 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up. At the macro level, you have a thing we call an ecosystem, which are long-term development of a community or a network of different stakeholders and actors within a region or a particular area, for them to really build an infrastructure for them to address this challenge better as a whole, and adding value and creating outcomes that are way beyond any of the individuals from the synergy between these different actors. So an ecosystem could be often location and kind of theme based. You might have in Sweden, you might have an ecosystem for developing the battery capacity, the energy storage capacity of Sweden. And that's a whole group of actors that are going to work together around that challenge. I actually have a few examples here. So here's actually two from Sweden. Well, these two, I've worked on this one here, for example. It's in Africa. It's Teka, which is trying to build a entrepreneurial ecosystem for coastal communities in Africa. The African Blue Wave is a visionary African-led initiative designed to sculpture a nature-positive and resilient future by 2030. It champions the fusion of cutting-edge technology innovations with ancient wisdom of Africa, fostering an environment where both nature and society flourish. And it's supported by BFA Global, but it's trying to create a platform supporting entrepreneurs in these coastal communities to develop responses to climate change, products, services, and responses to the kind of challenges that climate change will bring. That's one we've worked on. Another one here, Sustain Gov, the lady who's part of governance team, Maril, who we work with, has set this initiative up. It's a very recent one. It's trying to reform. It's a large ecosystem, large initiative over a prolonged period of time to reform the public sector in Sweden, and working across many different levels with different actors to do that. And just got funding about a year ago, so they're kind of just getting started there. Another one that's much more established is Viable Cities in Sweden, which is a network of about 48 Swedish cities working together towards climate neutral cities and all the things that need to come together for that, and really livable, viable cities. So those are examples of different types of kind of large scale ecosystems that typically last over prolonged periods of time, very often decades, to actually build these. And they are this macro picture at the larger scale. We do have a guide at SI, and you can see some of it here. If you search for it on the website, you'll find that. Won't go into all the details now. Maybe just pause there, so we might have a couple of minutes for any questions or comments before we wrap up. Yeah, any questions, Azra?
Yeah, I did see many in the chat, but yeah, there was this one by Susan.
We have this one here, don't they? Can they tell us more about how labs are set up if one works in private or public organizations and not employed or worked in the actual innovation? Yeah. So we have a guide here. I put a link to it at the beginning, and it kind of outlines some of the different aspects you need to think about there, from the identity of this lab, what's this about, what's the challenge, how are you going to present it to others, what's the narrative, the purpose, and so forth, who are the partners, who are the people you need to bring together, what activities are they going to do together over time, and how are you going to coordinate and support that, what's the kind of platform for this. And you can see it kind of goes through all of those, the different tracks you might work on in learning about this and collaborating around it. So you're welcome to take a look at that. Any other questions or comments? Was this useful, this graphic, in terms of different ways of approaching this? Hopefully you see the idea that it's always, systems innovation is always about facilitating and enabling others, the actors in the system, to come together within the right structure and process that enables them to productively start to learn together about the nature of this challenge, how they're going to work together, potential for collaboration there, and how they're actually going to co-create responses to this over time. Whether you're doing that in a 2-hour workshop, or whether you're doing it in a 30-year-long ecosystem development kind of initiative, or anywhere in between, that's what we're doing in systems innovation. And the little things should hopefully plug into the bigger things, which actually add up to the broader kind of ecosystem that really has the potential for larger scale systems innovation over time.
We have a question in the chat from Andres.
Yep.
Who is asking, do you have any solution for mega system modeling or process simulating?
Not sure about that one. Maybe drop it into the Exchange section on the website. I'll have a think about it, and maybe others can also. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? We'll draw to a close. We'll get to the end of our time. But, yeah. Okay. Where could you follow that? Maybe Ashley, you could find that, or I'll look for that on the website, put it into the chat in a minute. Hopefully that gave you a glimpse into what we're talking about here in terms of labs and co-creations. There are links there. You can go and learn more about those. Maybe I'll hand it over to Ashley for us to draw to a close.
Thanks, Joss, and thank you everyone for joining us for the SI Open Accelerator series. So today marks the end of the series, and we are here with a new program of called SI Learning Series. So we have an info session coming up on the 26th of February. You can click on the logo there. It takes you to the registration for the event. And you can register for the event there. So SI Learning Series is where you learn all the tools and methods that we have dealt in quite a fast pace here at a more slower and understandable pace. So you can also get yourself more into understanding what it is about. So we have really enjoyed and taken into account all your feedback from the last few sessions, and we would really love if you could take some time and put up your feedback here on the board today. I think you already have the link. You can rate the experience today in the session using the sticky here, and you can just grab a sticky and put it on the scale wherever you find it relevant. And I think Joss will lock the thing for you so it doesn't move. And then, okay, if you would also like to grab a mic and say how you thought about the series, and if you would like us to do something different or add something, you can always put it up in the sticky there, or you could also just grab a mic and let us know in a minute. If that's
I guess I can grab a sticky, but I also wanted to say, because it was an idea that I thought of a couple of days ago that I thought would be good for a person like me, that in one of these series, where you guys can, and maybe you've already done it before, but maybe take a snapshot or a period in history, something that has already happened. We already know how things, what the results were or whatever, but we can go through a particular scenario with a community, a group, a region, a country, a culture or group of people that were dealing with the problem, that now looking back, we can see how maybe it could have been solved, or that particular problem could have been prevented through using systems thinking or systems innovation. And we can use these tools that systems innovation offers to kind of look at that historical event through that lens, just so it's kind of like it feels more tangible and that we're working with it.
Great. Yeah, that's a good one, Danielle. Thanks for that. Kind of a case study we're working through as we go along. Yeah, thanks, good one. Alrighty.
Okay, so we have our peer coaching session on Monday. You can join us with a specific challenge that you would like to address and discuss with the others joining, and also with me and Joss. We have had 3 amazing sessions so far, and we had really good discussions. Maybe you could register here. There's a logo. It takes you to the place where you can register. And yeah, that is all from my side. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. It was so much fun doing this series with all of you.
Yeah, and if you're feeling you need to learn more about the ideas, you're welcome to join us in the learning series that's starting in a couple of months. Otherwise, let you all go. It was great. Actually, yeah, should say this is the first time doing this, right, Azra? Very experimental, so we learned maybe as much as you guys, and lots of stuff to build upon here, but great to have you on this journey so far. Yeah.
Josh, one last question. What system or software are you using? Like, it's like something like BuddyPress underneath. What